Welcome to a research presentation from the Mushroom Council's marketing team. I'm Christy Mather from Curious Plot, the Mushroom Council's agency of record. I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Mark Lang, a marketing strategy advisor for the Mushroom Council. Dr. Lang is a professor of marketing at the University of Tampa, and before academia, he was director of marketing and research at Publix supermarkets for more than 10 years. Today, Dr. Lang is going to share the results of recent consumer research that he led that reveals what consumers are thinking, feeling, and doing about mushrooms, the blend, and more. The research he's presenting today is available on mushroomcouncil.org, and we think it is helpful for you to hear Dr. Lang walk through the current findings. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to him now. Welcome, Dr. Lang.
Thank you, Christy. So this is a report that we do every few years at the Mushroom Council. It's a tracking study, meaning that it's a shorter monitoring type of report versus a larger full-scale usage and attitude report. These are done in between. And what we do is we take some of the important measurements or KPIs that we track over time, and we do like a periodic checking in with them here. So that's what we have here. The report, you can see when you look at your own copy of it, in terms of research methodology, we base the report on about 1,200 respondents across the US, and it's meant to be representative of the US population. So we're trying to pull in everybody here and then get measurements on their usage and their attitudes regarding mushrooms. The last time we did a study like this was in fall 2018, and the timing of our data here was fall 2020. So it's really a checking in on how have things changed over time. When we're looking at scoring in this study, keep in mind that there's a margin of error of about 3 to 4% based on the sample size and the variance that's in it. So a change in numbers that's less than 3% is not really a change in numbers, it's equal. So it needs to be 4%, 5% or greater to actually be a change that's meaningful or statistically present or accurate. So what I'd like to do is speak to you about key learning that I found in doing the analysis and discussing it with the Mushroom Council senior leadership team. So I'll walk you through what I see are key learnings. Then I'm going to jump to slides that will show you data that supports that idea. So we can jump into it right now. I have 4 key learning that we'll cover as an overview of the report. Number 1, overall results show a shift to a lower frequency of fresh mushroom consumption between 2022 and 2018. So this shift appears a few places in the data as I do the analysis. And it seems that fresh mushrooms have shifted to a higher price perception for about 10% of shoppers. And that 10% of shoppers, I think, explains the decrease in mushroom consumption over the period. And the percentage of shoppers that definitely or probably would buy fresh mushrooms has dropped in that same period. So let me take you to some slides to show you that. So my first comment was frequency of fresh mushroom consumption has declined over that period. So we measure heavy, medium, and light consumption. You can see that here. That's weekly, monthly, yearly, or less than yearly. So people that have consumed mushrooms in the survey decreased from 93% in 2018 to 82% in 2020, the time frame of this study. So that's what I was referring to earlier, that mushroom consumption appears to have declined in that period. Another way we can look at that is looking at it away from home, and we see a comparable decline there. Another table we can look at that shows the decline in consumption is if people are using more, less, or the same amount of mushrooms compared to 1 year ago. And we see on this table here from 2018 compared to 2022, we see that there are more people using less and there are fewer people using the same. So this is another indication of a decline in consumption in households with consumers. Regarding my comment about price perception, we could see here on a scale of 1 to 10 people could evaluate the regular price of mushrooms compared to other fruits and vegetables in the produce department. 1 would be much lower, 10 would be much higher, and about 5 would be priced about the same. When we compare 2018 to 2022, we're seeing that there's an increase in the number of people that think that the price is higher, from 7% of people thinking the price is higher to 16%. We also see a decline in the number of people that think the price is lower over time, decreasing from 16 to 6%. Lastly, in terms of purchase intention, we see that the number of people, or the proportion of people that definitely or probably would buy mushrooms given the chance or the availability, declined from 71% in 2018 to 66%. So these series of slides I've just shown you, there's other slides with more data, but they're the ones that indicate for me that consumption has declined over the time period of the study. The next e-learning I want to share with you is that perceptions and attitudes do not show a decline in mushroom interest, use, or value. That's an important observation, that the decline in mushroom consumption isn't the result of reduced interest, use, or value. It's the result of something else that I'll talk about in a minute. So I see measures of fresh mushroom status as a staple in the kitchen remains constant. The percent of people willing to pay more is roughly the same, or is actually increased a little bit. Perceptions of healthy, sustainable, and flavor have all held stable since 2018. And mushrooms are one of the foods with lower intended spending reductions due to inflation. So let's have a look at those slides for a second. We ask consumers, do they often include mushrooms on their grocery list, or do they always have mushrooms on hand, kind of indications of staple status? And when we look at average scores between 2018 and 2020, they're essentially the same. Those are very small changes, and they may not even be outside of the statistical margin of error. So staple status for mushrooms is remaining constant. That's my earlier comment. Also, we ask people if they're willing to pay a higher price for mushrooms. We actually see an increase from 2018 to 2022, and very small changes here. So price permission is increasing for mushrooms. So that indicates for me that the value of mushrooms is not going down. So that's not the reason why consumption is going down. So they're still holding in terms of their value. We also ask questions regularly regarding mushrooms contributing to better health, environmental sustainability, adding flavors, popularity of the food. These are perceptions that we track that are what should be behind people wanting to consume mushrooms. And when we look at scores over time, they're very consistent. So we're not seeing a decline in scores across periods of time, meaning that perceptions of mushrooms are still strong. The last slide I'll look at for this topic is the idea of mushrooms being reduced in terms of consumption because of inflation. So this was a special question of the moment that we added to this particular survey. And we asked people, due to inflation-driven concerns, how will your spending on the following grocery products change over the 6 months? I've ranked these based on reduction, the likelihood of people reducing consumption of a product over time. And you can see the highest numbers for reduction, the highest intent. 30% of respondents said they've reduced their consumption of steak. You could see steak, desserts, seafood, and berries and eggs, all things that have higher intention to reduce due to inflation. But it's interesting to see where mushrooms are. They're at the very lower part of this list, and they're in a range that includes cheeses, potatoes, and onions, staple products. So mushrooms are not something that is going to be hurt excessively by inflation. They're still perceived as reasonably priced, and there's still great intention to purchase mushrooms even in inflationary setting. So these comments I'm sharing are the idea that sales are declining, but perception and attitudes do not show a decline in terms of interest, use, or value. So the third key learning I want to share is somewhat of my interpretation of what's going on here. I interpret this as mushroom purchases experiencing a short-term decline due to budget pressure on some households from higher food prices overall. That's what I'm saying right here, and not a long-term decline in the consumption of fresh mushrooms due to some fundamental issues like intention to use, value, or perceptions and attitudes. So I think that this corresponds with a notable shift to lower priced alternative food stores away from traditional supermarkets. For example, Walmart has received the largest part of this shift. This is a ranking of where people typically purchase fresh mushrooms for their home. And you could see multiple different formats here. We track this every time we do a survey to try and understand this. And I'm saying that there has been a noticeable decline in the purchase of fresh mushrooms from traditional supermarkets, and there have been noticeable increases in places that are price or value oriented. The number one increase being Walmart stores and supercenters, other value discount formats, and other supermarkets. So I see a shift away from traditional supermarkets to less expensive formats as people try and manage their overall household budget and try and purchase mushrooms and try and save overall. So that goes back to my comment. I interpret this as a short-term decline due to budget pressure on households. I'd say mostly in the 10% of households we saw earlier that were reducing consumption and we're seeing mushrooms as slightly more expensive. So I see that as corresponding with that. The last observation I want to make is looking at kind of marketing and the marketplace for mushrooms. So as I look at findings here, I see that they indicate that marketing and merchandising efforts by mushroom shippers and marketers and by the Mushroom Council and retailers are still bringing in new customers and uses. There are still more and new people coming to mushrooms and adopting them into their households, but that is being impacted by the other group of people who, due to budget pressures, are reducing. So we're seeing those two factors in play. The number of shoppers who have started consuming mushrooms within the past 2 years has increased from 2018 to 2019. And that's a measure that we look at as marketers. Are marketing, communications, and promotions bringing new users into the category? A pretty important measure for the marketers. There has also been a noticeable increase in consumers using mushrooms in special recipes and for multiple occasions. We've also looked at the blend in this area, which is an important product usage that the Mushroom Council has been promoting for several years now. Trial has increased to about 55% compared to 18% in 2018, which is a significant increase. So this idea of beginning to purchase mushrooms for the first time increased from 8% to 19% over this time period. So that's a significant number of new consumers brought into the category as a result of marketing and promotion. Also, we look at people using mushrooms for special occasions and in special recipes. We see a large increase here as well compared to 2018. So kind of like new uses happening there. Awareness of the blend has not changed over the time period of 2018 to 2022. It's basically stayed the same. But you can see trial of this, of those that are aware, trial has increased from 18% of those aware in 2018 to 55% in 2022. So that's a significant increase in trial and use of the blend, which is important because the blend has been relied on as a vehicle to get people to try mushrooms for the first time and to incorporate them into their daily lifestyle more. So I'll take us back to our final, back to our key learning and just recap those again for you. So we do see a shift to lower consumption over that time period. And we see some data that explains that. But it's not due to a decline in attitudes or perceptions of mushrooms in terms of issue, interest, their use, or their value. I interpret it as a short-term decline due to budget pressures on some households, probably 10% of households, due to higher food prices overall, and not a long-term decline in the consumption, interest, value, and use of mushrooms. And lastly, I see that marketing and merchandising efforts from players across the industry are still successful in bringing in new consumers and uses of mushrooms, which is another reason why I think the long-term prospect for mushroom consumption will recover as inflationary pressures reduce on some households and less reduction of discretionary type items as people try and save on their budgets. So that's a study that we've done, and there are lots of additional information in the study that support these and other findings. I encourage you to have a look at it, as well as many other resources that are available through the Mushroom Council like this one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lang. We really appreciate your good work in conducting this research, and thank you for adding some more color to the meaning of these results in today's marketplace. Remember that these research results are available on mushroomcouncil.org, along with other valuable research and resources for the mushroom industry. This concludes our consumer research update. Thanks again.